Hello everyone, and welcome to part 6 of my complete Imani guide. This video serves as a follow-up to the previous 5 parts of the guide. Throughout this video, I will update you on all the going-ons surrounding Imani to get you caught up for the new year. Let's light it up! When we were last here, my overall stance on Imani was fairly negative, following a slew of poor balance. Fortunately, Imani has been eating real good since then. Starting us off on November 16th, 2022, Imani received a substantial buff to the Pyromania talent. Now the talent greatly increases the mana generation of your Pyreballs. At the time, you went from needing 10 Fireballs to just 3 for a full mana bar. This helped to offset the damage penalty of the talent. On May 17th, 2023, Imani received her most impactful balance changes ever. The pièce de résistance was Affinity 5 going to base kit, meaning the cooldown on Elemental Shift was lowered from 6 seconds to just 1 second at base. Previously, you had to invest 5 loadout points for this effect. Now, Imanis of all talents and loadouts have access to fluid stance swapping, and the champion plays much better because of that. Due to the new cooldown of Elemental Shift, all of Imani's cards surrounding the ability now have 3-second internal timers. In the same patch, the cooldowns on the Frostbomb and Inferno Cannon were lowered from 15 to 13 seconds, once again making the champion more fluid with faster cooldown cycling. The Inferno Cannon also received the addition of knockback immunity to prevent the momentum bug. Since the old Affinity went to base kit, the card was reworked in this patch. The old card reduced the cooldown of Elemental Shift. The new card grants you 5% scaling damage reduction for 2 seconds upon using Shift, but as mentioned, there is a 3-second internal timer. Through these first few patches, the Frostbolts received a small damage buff, going from 410 to 440 per bolt, bringing Imani's Frostbolt DPS up from 820 to 880, which is still on the lower side for damage dealers. Frankly, it's in line with support's damage output. But keep in mind, this is accompanied by the bolt's slowing potential. Going from her best set of changes to her weirdest. On October 25th, 2023, Imani's Mana Rift talent was nerfed. The visual of the rift was increased from 10 to 30 units to match its actual range. The main takeaway from this change is that it's much easier to see where Imani's Mana Rift is. The biggest issue I take with this change is that the rift's visuals go through walls, meaning that you lose the element of surprise by turning a corner to anticipate an encounter, since the enemy will know what's coming. Alternatively, it makes it easier for enemy flankers to find you, especially during ult. The talent realistically hasn't lost much power, but I still feel this change was silly. I distinctly recall the dev comments on this change, where they said, "It's hard for some players to tell when Imani is benefiting from her mana rift." Huh? Next we get to Imani's Banners Fall updates. The level 4 version of the Pyretic Momentum card went to base kit, meaning that Frostfire Glide's move speed was increased by 20% at base. Because of this, and the Affinity card going to base kit, the loadout potential for Imani has opened up tremendously. Because Draconic Will went to base, the card was reworked, with the new version boosting your move speed by 8% scaling for 3 seconds after using Glide. In this same patch, Imani received a bug fix that was actually a hefty buff in disguise. Damage falloff from the Dragon's Call ultimate was removed entirely, which has made the ult insanely lethal. Well, even more insanely lethal. In the Skaldrin Celebration patch, Haven and Blast Shields returned, meaning that players need to purchase one or the other to counter either direct or area damage, which is overall a nice buff for Imani, who utilizes both damage types. Finally, we arrive to our Season 8 and final changes for Imani. The most notable is a huge buff for Pyromania. The talent no longer applies a damage penalty to your fireballs. This tweak turned Imani's arguably worst talent into easily her best. We'll discuss this more in the updated talent section. And lastly is one card buff for Arcane Ice. which boosts the mana generation of Frost Bomb. It got its scaling upped from 15% to 25% per level. And that brings us to the present and final balanced state of Imani. While she still has some outliers, mainly cards for me, I do think this is the best state Imani has been in ever. Now, let's discuss how these specific changes and overall tweaks to the game affect Imani in the realm. In stark contrast to my first parts of the guide, I now find Pyromania to be Imani's best talent by far. You retain full damage on your fireballs. They now explode in a very generous AoE, allowing you to tag multiple foes and enemies around corners. Additionally, due to the return of Haven and Blast Shields, it means that enemies have to buy Blast Shields to counter your now area damage primary fire. Do note that overall Blast Shields is a less common purchase than Haven, so because of this, you will retain full damage on your fireballs if the enemy neglects to buy the appropriate item to counter it. And this is combined with the bonus mana generation. It feels like the devs forgot to take this stat out when buffing the damage of this talent, because now you only need 2. That's right, 2 fireballs to reach full mana, meaning you can Fire Burst once every 3 fireballs with this talent. Because of this, I see no logical reason to pick Mana Rift going forward. The only arguments I can make for Mana Rift is the slightly boosted DPS when dueling tanks and ice, which in most cases isn't worth it due to needing to stand still to activate the Rift. There's also the ability to prep a Fire Burst combo ahead of time, which is riskier now due to Mana Rift's visual appearing through walls. While prepping a Fire Burst is nice, it doesn't offset the strength of the near constant fire bursts you get with Pyromania now. As for Splitting Ice, it's the only talent that hasn't changed. Pick this one if you're partial to the Frostbolts. Just to clarify, I don't think Splitting Ice or Mana Rift are bad. It's just that Pyromania has the strengths of both talents combined. Most of Imani's cards haven't changed stats-wise. However, since Affinity and Pyretic Momentum went to base kit, you have a lot more flexibility in your builds, and as such, the hierarchy of loadout cards has changed a bit. Let's talk about it. As mentioned in previous parts, I feel that Imani's best cards pertain to a stance-swapping playstyle, but you do have some options for solo stance play as well. Let's start this tier list with the new worst card in my eyes, Elemental Barrier. This card heals Imani for 50 scaling when activating Elemental Shift. The reason this card swapped places with Elemental Grace is because of the new 3-second internal timer applied to all Elemental Shift cards. The healing from this card is low, even when capped, and that only gets worse as a match progresses due to scaling Cauterize. At the top of F, we have Elemental Grace, which grants a 100 HP scaling shield for 3 seconds after hitting half health. The only time I can recommend this card is if you're a newbie to Paladins who happens to be playing Imani. The shield from the card can act as a buffer when you're overwhelmed by all the new enemy abilities in this game. Many champions have shield cards like these, and I'm generally not a fan. The scaling is too low for my eyes to justify the 30-second timer. My thought process behind both of these F-tier cards is that they're not worth it as filler or fully capped. Hence why they are my least valued cards for Imani. Next is a card that's dropped a few pegs. Permafrost kicks off the bottom of C tier. In the past I have said that being able to use a Frost Bomb at range is nice. And yes, it still is. But the more I play Imani, the less I'm inclined to like this card. Typically, I use the Frost Bomb at either mid or close range. Sometimes I insta-detonate it for the immediate root. I feel that the longer a Frost Bomb is floating on the field, the more time the enemies gain to react to it. This card promotes using the Frost Bomb at a distance, which I don't feel is a viable strategy for the ability, or the Frost stance as a whole, since that's your mid to close range battle stance. Hence the card's lower placing now. Next we got our mana generation cards, Arcane Flame and Ice. Arcane Ice did get a buff in this last patch of Paladins, going from 15 to 25% scaling. Capped out, you gain about 75% mana from a Frost Bomb. But I still don't feel this card is worth it. mana generation on Ice Stance is fine, and you have 2 talents to boost your mana generation anyways. Because of that, I feel this card is unnecessary. The same logic applies to Arcane Flame. I only have that a smidge higher because you can get a full mana bar from capping the card. Second to last in C tier is a card I desperately tried to love, the new Affinity, which grants 5% scaling damage reduction for 2 seconds upon activating Elemental Shift. The card has a 3-second internal cooldown. In the first parts of the guide, I hammered it into you guys that Imani can be quite frail with little options to remedy that. So when I saw that she was getting a card for damage reduction, I was very excited initially. Originally, the card had a 5-second internal timer, which was recently lowered to 3 seconds. Still though, I don't like it. In theory, you can only have a 1-second downtime on 25% damage reduction, but the method of activation can feel clunky. To maintain maximum uptime on the DR, you need to swap stances every 3 seconds, which oftentimes isn't the best play on Imani. Typically, Imani is most threatened when dueling opponents up close. So, in a bubble, you could be fighting someone in fire when they get close. You swap to ice for the DR, but it's gone in 2 seconds, so you could swap back to fire, but now you're in fire stance for a close range endeavor. In all my testing with this card, I only have one instance where it truly saved my life. If the card scaled better, or lasted longer, or had no wonky internal timer to worry about, then it would be better in my eyes. I still think this card can have potential with Imanis who truly know how to min-max. But for me, I find the card to be too finicky to get consistent value out of, and that's the reason it's in C tier. At the top of C tier, it's Mystic Fire. Like I mentioned with the Arcane cards, I find generating mana to be fairly consistent without the need of loadout cards. Still though, if you want a mana generation card in your build, this one is my favorite. Capped out, you can get a full mana bar through the Frostfire Glide. It also serves as a decent filler, giving you 20% mana at level 1. At the bottom of B, we have Swift Seer, which boosts your move speed by 20% per level when casting Infernal Cannon. With Affinity and Pyretic Momentum going to base kit, I feel that this is arguably Imani's only required loadout card left. Without it, the Infernal Cannon is extremely risky due to the hefty 40% self-slow. Because of that, I recommend having this card at least as a filler. Only if you plan on using the Infernal Cannon often, or in riskier scenarios. If you don't care for the Infernal Cannon, or mainly use it as a finisher, then I think you're safe to skip on this card. Gonna quickly skim these next 3 cards since my stance hasn't changed on them. Pilgrimage increases the duration of Frostfire Glide by 0.5 seconds scaling. It's not a necessary card, but it is nice as a filler. Ice Inner Veins heals you for 50 scaling every second while using Frostfire Glide. This is Imani's only viable healing card. The self-healing acting as a buffer makes the Frostfire Glide much safer to use. Ancient Duty increases your health by 50 scaling. HP cards are always nice. Kicking off the bottom of A tier is the new Pyretic Momentum card, which increases your move speed by 8% scaling for 3 seconds after using Glide. This card essentially allows you to cover more ground per use of the Frostfire Glide, allowing you more opportunities to take cover and reposition as needed. The 40% speed boost when capped is quite noticeable, and is a nice change of pace for Imani, who is typically a slower champion, at least when it comes to move speed. My 2 caveats with this card is that I would have it at a level 3 minimum, as I find the move speed to be negligible below that. Additionally, I would not pick this card if you're running Mana Rift. When I would play Mana Rift, after using Frostfire Glide, I would intentionally stand still so I could generate a new Rift. If you choose to keep moving after Frostfire Glide, you ignore that strategy. If you choose to generate a Rift after Frostfire Glide, then there's no point to this card. Top of A is Discipline, which reduces the cooldown of Frostfire Glide by 0.6 seconds scaling upon using Elemental Shift. The only change it's had since last time is the global 3-second internal timer applied to the Shift cards. Despite the internal cooldown, I feel the card's strength hasn't moved. This is Imani's only option to reduce the cooldown of Frostfire Glide. When capped, each use of the skill takes off 3 seconds, or 25%, of Glide's cooldown. When perfectly playing around the timer, you could cut the cooldown of Frostfire Glide in half. In our new S tier are the staple stance swap reset cards. Cooling Runes reduces the cooldown of Inferno Cannon by 0.5 seconds scaling upon hitting Frostbolts. Heatsink reduces the cooldown of Frostbomb by 0.8 seconds scaling upon hitting Fireball, while Draconic Will reduces the cooldowns of both secondaries by 0.6 seconds scaling upon using Elemental Shift. However, this card has a 3-second internal timer. In my opinion, these three cards are all on fairly equal footing. Below the Old Infinity, these were Imani's strongest cards, and they got even stronger due to the base cooldown buffs on both secondaries. With Cooling Runes and Heatsink capped, you can reset the cooldown of the opposite secondary in just about 3 seconds by hitting shots. With Draconic Will capped, you can reset both your secondaries' cooldowns in about 6 seconds when properly timing shifts. In my opinion, these are Imani's strongest cards as they give you faster access to your power moves by doing what you normally do on Imani anyways. To determine which card you should use, you should evaluate your playstyle on Imani. If you are a general stance swapper who is constantly using shift, then I would prioritize Draconic Will, since you reduce the cooldowns of both secondaries. If you prefer sticking to one stance, but enjoy the secondary of the other, then I would pick Cooling Runes or Heatsink. Me personally, I prefer the Pyreball primary, but I've come to prefer the Frostbomb as my secondary due to its combo potential, making Heatsink the obvious choice for me. Bonus tips for Heatsink specifically: your Pyreballs don't have to be fully charged to benefit from the card. With uncharged shots, you can refund your Frostbomb's cooldown in about 1.5 seconds. You can also proc this card easier with Pyromania Fireballs, allowing for scenarios like this.
He's on the right, he's pretty low. He's in the thing.
That was just unfortunate.
Not charged to ceasing.
That's okay.
Guys, you really can't see. Makoa, you've been saying that for quite a while now. Alright, you guys got this.
I will say one little tidbit with these cards. Cooling Runes and Heatsink, I feel, can be run as fillers, since they're constantly proccing from hitting shots. Whereas Draconic Will, I feel needs to be leveled a decent bit to see maximum value. At least a 3 minimum. In general with the stance swapping cards, I would recommend picking one of the 3, depending on your preferred playstyle. You can double down, or even triple down, by taking all of these cards in your stance swap build, but then you're losing points on other cards from A or B tier. Relying solely on the cooldown reset cards can leave Imani feeling quite frail. In general, I would look to have at least one of these S tier cards in your build. As mentioned, it doesn't have to be fully capped. Afterwards, look to prioritize cards from A and B tier to bolster your survivability. Personally, I would not bother with cards from C and below. Of course, this is all my opinion. Don't let me stop you from using your favorite builds and being creative. And a challenge for those watching: if any of you can make a use case or a usable loadout for Affinity, please let me know. I want to take this opportunity to discuss my updated Imani decks, since a majority of them had to be changed. Up first, we have my go-to build, Symmetra 4.0, Ancient Duty 5, Ice Inner Veins 4, Swift Seer 3, Heatsink 2, Pilgrimage 1. If you hadn't guessed by now, I prefer playing Imani in Fire Stance. Previously, I had Pyretic Momentum capped in this build, but since the card was added to base kit, I got 5 whole loadout points to play with. This build in general aims to bolster Imani's defense, with Ancient Duty capped and Ice Inner Veins now at a level 4. The notable addition since last time is Heatsink 2. Since Elemental Shift is only 1 second now, you're not punished for swapping stances like in the past. Because of that, I find myself switching to Frost more often. It's for that reason I have this card. Having more roots is excellent to aid your team, but a lot of times in my case, I need the opponent to stand still so I can actually land a Frostbolt with my pity aim. Next is Frozen in Time. Ancient Duty 5, Ice Inner Veins 4, Pyretic Momentum 3, Permafrost 2, Arcane Ice 1. This build serves as the inverse to my main build, which is a self-defense based build, but this one focuses on staying in the Frost stance. Permafrost 2 means you could throw your bomb a bit further in the back, and the slight increase to mana gain via Arcane Ice will help to keep those double shots going. Next is my stance swap reset build, Hot and Cold. Heatsink 4, Cooling Runes 4, Draconic Will 4, Swift Seer 2, Discipline 1. With this build, you get your cooldowns back super quick, but you lack self-defense cards. This is my Glass Cannon build, and also my preferred build for wave defense. Next is my Frostbomb spam build, World So Cold. Heatsink 5, Draconic Will 5, Ancient Duty 2, Pyretic Momentum 2, Ice Inner Veins 1. With this build, you will be constantly resetting the cooldown of Frostbomb, and you aren't completely fragile due to having some light defense. Next up, we have a different take on a defensive build. This is Maniac Mode. Pyretic Momentum 5, Discipline 5, Ancient Duty 2, Ice Inner Veins 2, Mystic Fire 1. The idea with this build is to stay alive by constantly repositioning with Glide. Pyretic Momentum Capped helps a lot with this. Via Discipline, you can make sure your Frostfire Glide is always ready when you need. Because you're gliding so often with this build, I actually find Mystic Fire to be a decent filler here. Next is my Mimi Inferno Cannon speed build, otherwise known as a takedown build. This is Burnout Legend. Swift Seer 5, Pyretic Momentum 5, Cooling Runes 3, Discipline 1, Draconic Will 1. Pyretic Momentum and Swift Seer actually stack together, meaning that if you initiate a Firefly combo by using the Frostfire Glide first, you will double down on your move speed boosts. Do note that attacking in this method will almost always get you killed, but it is a silly way to play Imani once in a while. Another meme-worthy build is Discount Mana Rift, which I originally made to make Pyromania useful back in the day. Mystic Fire 5, Arcane Flame 4, Permafrost 3, Ice Inner Veins 2, Swift Seer 1. The idea with this build is to have a never-ending supply of mana generation. Preferably, you start your mana gain by using Frostfire Glide on a wall, hitting a full mana shot, then using Inferno Cannon, then hitting another full mana shot. Then, use Frostbomb to kickstart the combo all over again. Truthfully, this is a silly and now outdated way to play Imani, since mana gen is so good with her talents. Second to last, we have my attempt at making Affinity useful. Tower Shield. Affinity 5, Ancient Duty 5, Draconic Will 2, Elemental Barrier 2, Swift Seer 1. The idea here is that by capping HP with Affinity, you can maximize the DR. As mentioned previously though, I don't find the card to be worth it. My last build is specifically for Imani in the Truly Talented LTM. In Truly Talented, Imani's talent is Equilibrium, which grants her a 30% attack speed increase for 3 seconds upon using Elemental Shift. In general, I found swapping to Ice and just clobbering on someone to be the most viable strategy, but the faster fireballs are nice too. Anyways, the build. Ancient Duty 4, Discipline 3, Draconic Will 3, Pyretic Momentum 3, Swift Seer 2. This build intends to take a mix of stance swapping with defense. In general, the way I would play was by rushing in with Frostfire Glide and then using the move speed from Pyretic Momentum to run at people while pelting them with Frostbolts. The Elemental Shift cooldown card's 3-second internal timer doubles as a way to tell you how long the attack speed bonus will last. If you're able to play the mode in customs, I recommend this build for it. I'm actually kinda sad that Equilibrium never made it to the base game. I thought it was a fun talent. Since last time, the item store received its big rework, with many adjustments and the introduction of 5 new items. Once again, we got another tier list. Kicking off our S tiers, we have Haven, Blast Shields, and Veteran. All are here for the sake of boosting Imani's defense. The use cases for each of these items depends on the enemy team, If the enemy consists of mainly direct damagers, I'll prioritize Haven. If it's AoE damage, then I'll get Blast Shields. If it's a mix of both, I'll prioritize Veteran. Additionally with Veteran, you could use it to double down on either your Haven or Blast Shields, since extra HP stacks with DR. Our last item in S tier is Nimble, which has been buffed massively since last time. Now the item grants 10% move speed per level, up from 7%. So when capped, you gain a 30% speed boost. Capping this item is also easier since its price got lowered to just 125 credits scaling. Having extra move speed aids in those in and out poke fights, helps with repositioning, and helps Imani escape unfavored situations. Overall, a really solid item. Imani feels kinda sluggish without it. Next, we got our A tiers. Chronos still holds the top spot. For me personally though, I'm used to Imani's cooldowns, but if you're not, or just want to push the champion to the max, then get some Chronos. With max Chronos, the cooldown on Frostfire Glide goes to 8.4 seconds, while the cooldowns on the secondaries go to 9.1 seconds. Jumping up since last time, we have the buffed Life Rip. The scaling lifesteal has been upped from 10 to 20%. Because of this, I actually took a recent liking to the item on Imani, especially in Fire Stance. Capped out, you can heal for 600 a pop from each fireball, which is roughly a quarter of your health. Keep in mind that in Fire Stance, you're typically playing in the backline, and preferably cleansing Cauterize, making this a fairly safe way to sustain yourself. For the Frostbolts, you heal for 264 per bolt, which isn't too shabby, but due to the range difference, you might be dealing with anti-healing more in Frost Dance as opposed to Fire. Do keep in mind that this item gets drastically weaker as a match continues due to scaling Cauterize. Still though, if you're good at cleansing Caught, you'll see some great use from this item. Starting us off in B is a new and controversial item, Horde. The bonus credit gain is nice, but the main reason Horde makes it to B tier is for its final form, which grants 10% move speed, mount speed, cooldowns, and bonus ult charge. Stacking that bonus with other items can make Imani quite potent. The issue is getting there, as level 3 Horde has a massive 1750 credit cost. Despite the level 3 version of the item being its strength, I treat that as a secondary objective when picking this item. Typically, I will purchase Horde with a plan on capping other items faster. For example, if I'm using a build that capitalizes on cooldown reductions, I'll get my Horde to level 2 and then focus on my Chronos. Once I'm comfortable with my other items, I'll work on capping Horde for the extra bonuses. Again though, Horde is a pricey investment, and until it's capped, you're essentially down on what could be a vital item. This item is not for everyone, so I recommend you try it and form your own opinion. It can be boom or bust in many scenarios, hence its placement in B tier. Next in B tier is Morale Boost. As mentioned previously, Dragon's Call can be an inconsistent ultimate. Because of that, Morale Boost follows suit. If you find yourself getting lots of value with the dragon and want to do so more often, then take some Morale Boost. Finishing B tier is the on-kill items. Like the previously mentioned B tiers, I find these to be inconsistent in their value. Some games can be very defensive, where few champions are dying. Because of that, having an item that only procs on a limbs will put you at a disadvantage when compared to an item with constant uptime. Up first, we have Bloodbath. Personally, I prefer Life Rip for gaining health mid-combat, but Bloodbath serves as an option for those who want to maximize their self-healing. This self-healing has the bonus of being unaffected by Caught, and also being able to heal assisting allies. Next is Trigger Scent. In the past, this item worked on both weapon and ability damage, but it was reworked to only affect in-hands. Which can I just say, I wish they didn't change that. Being able to boost your Infernal Cannon's damage back to 110 a tick felt so nice. Anyways, for the current Trigger Scent, an 18% bonus to damage is pretty nice on Imani, especially in Fire Stance. With a Fire Burst combo, you can execute most squishies with a 2360 burst from 2 fireballs. Next is Sentinel. The shield on a limb is fine, but I feel that the scaling is too low, and the shield can be heavily countered if the opponent takes Wrecker to counter your tanks. Last up, we have Lethality. I would just buy Nimble. It's cheaper, and that speed boost is constantly active. The only use case I have for Lethality is when playing the Takedown Firefly style, which isn't Imani's best. In C tier, we have our situational items. None of these items are bad, but I would only pick them if you need to counter something on the enemy team. Resilience counters annoying CC that can shut down your game plan. Wrecker and Bulldozer serve to counter frustrating tanks. I must say that I feel that most tank shields and deployables can be outplayed without these items though. Typically most shields can be outmaneuvered or waited out. As for Master Riding, it's a siege specific item, really only useful on a few maps, and Imani isn't a frontline brawler. Rushing back to touch the point isn't her job. Unfortunately, a new item store means a new sim tier. At the top, we have Veteran, Meditation, which boosts your out of combat healing. When capped, yes, the bonus heals are quite noticeable, but I would rather invest those credits into something that helps me stay in battle, as opposed to avoiding it. Guardian makes second to last. The only shield Imani can make herself is from the Elemental Grace card, which as mentioned earlier, is one of her weakest. Outside of that, you can combo this item with Sentinel to have a big shield on a limb, but really, why invest all those credits to do that? Last in sim tier, and the worst item in the game for Imani by far, is the new Rejuvenate, which boosts your healing by 10% scaling. For Imani specifically, this only works with Elemental Barrier, her worst card, and Ice in her Veins, which is a decent card. Capped, the healing goes from 250 per second to 325 a second. All those credits for a measly 75 heals per second increase. And that's assuming you're running Ice in her Veins capped. Seriously, not worth it. If you want self-healing, just get Life Rip. Going forward, let's get the update on our bugs. The Infernal Cannon momentum bug has been fixed. Well, half fixed. Through all her balance, Imani did get knockback immunity added to the cannon, meaning that if you start the flamethrower and then get hit by a knockback skill, you won't be displaced, and as such, won't lose your momentum. But if you get hit with a displacement skill prior to using the cannon in the air, you will still not be able to fully control your character. Because of this, if you get hit with a displacement skill, it is imperative to not use your Infernal Cannon until you touch the ground. If you fail to do so, you will still encounter the Infernal Cannon momentum bug. Overall, since the half fix, I have encountered this bug a lot less. Missing HP bar. Our last new bug, and a major one, is Imani's health bar disappearing during Dragon's Call. Previously, Imani's health bar was present somewhere on the screen relative to where she was. Now her HP bar is completely gone during ult, removing vital information from the player on if they need to cancel the ult early. If you're against competent flanks, you just have to hope and pray to Genos that you're not getting dived during ult, as the only way you'll know now is if you get killed. Because of this bug, I've found myself canceling ult early because I can't find the enemy flanker, only to return to Imani being safe and sound. Because of this bug, it is doubly imperative to know where the enemy flanker is in regards to Imani when you're ulting. I would advise against using ult unless you know the enemy flank is either dead or out of position. To wrap up the guide, I wanted to drop some tips against our newest and updated champions since last time. Caspian is actually a character now. Deadly Momentum no longer forces him to stop at the end of it. Because of this, it can be a bit trickier to hit him after it ends. Do also note that Deadly Momentum grants Caspian a hefty 30% damage reduction while it's active. Like other flanks, try to deal with Caspian at range to prevent him from getting close. The primary fire via Love has incredibly low DPS and fires a super teensy projectile. Because of this, you have the edge in longer range fights. If you can get him to commit his dashes, then that's one less ability he has to engage on you or an ally. Rogue's tempo no longer stuns, but it does have a consistent fast projectile speed, and it cripples now. Be mindful of it, especially when fighting at range because of that speedy projectile. Caspian never got any health cards, so a Fire Burst combo will leave him with only 100 health, which you can usually take out by yourself with one Inferno Cannon tick or a Frostbolt. Seris has gotten buff after buff after buff since the first parts of the guide. The biggest takeaways are the Agony and Soul Collector talents going to base kit. Decent Seris players are a lot riskier to duel now, not only because they can have a 24% bonus to their health and damage, but mainly due to the constant threat of the Agony stun. Because of this, when dueling Seris, you have to mentally track how many hits she's landed on you. If you've been tagged with 4 or more Soul Orbs, then I would advise against using Frostfire Glide for an early retreat, as Seris will most likely stun you out of it. Wanna know something scary? At max Soul Collector stacks, Seris deals about the same DPS that you do in your Frostbolts. Typically at max stacks, Seris can win that fight due to hosting a higher health pool with the advantage of having a self-heal that doubles as a stun. To counter Seris, I prioritize playing away from my allies. Seris' Soul Orbs are usually spammed at the brunt of your team. I try to play on an off angle, usually at high ground, to force Seris to aim towards me if she wants that fight. If she chooses to fight you at range, you do have the advantage since her projectiles are much slower than yours. Up close is when Seris becomes scary for Imani. On top of the off-angle approach, I also apply the flanker mentality to enemy Seris players. Prioritize scaring her off with high damage fireballs, to either bait out abilities or chip away at her health. Do also take note of her loadout, mainly the Veil card. If Seris isn't running this card, it is super easy to root her during the windup of Shadow Travel. If Seris is running this card, especially at higher levels, then I would advise against using Frostbomb until Shadow Travel has expired, as your root window is super small. Do note that you can still stalk Seris during the ability, and it's even easier now due to Illuminate going to the base kit. Against Seris' pocket target, I highly advise against using the Inferno Cannon unless you have ticked that enemy with a primary fire first to apply Cauterize. Seris got a buff to her healing for reasons, and because of this, an uncauted Inferno Cannon can be easily neutered by Restore Soul. It's crazy to see how the duel against Seris has changed so much since last time. I should note that many Seris players are either new to the game, or just not good at the game, so your experience when dueling Seris will vary based on who's playing her. Willow got the introduction of a new passive since last time. This passive allows Willow to glide in the air, akin to Androxus. Said passive allows Willow to play as a pseudo-flyer, akin to a mock Drogos. The introduction of this passive, alongside the buffs to Willow's talents, has made her a menace to many players. Due to her new passive, many Willow players prefer to stay in the sky for as long as possible, so they could carpet bomb opponents below. However, you as Imani can counter this. The most obvious tip is to hit her with the Frostbomb root to force her to stay in place, but sometimes Willow is too far away for this to be applicable. The same deal goes for dueling her with your primaries. This is actually one duel where I find the Inferno Cannon, specifically the Firefly combo, to be ideal. The main reason for preferring a Firefly combo is to keep Imani airborne. Because you're not on the ground, when dueling a Willow in this manner, she has to hit you directly, as she can't rely on her lenient splash damage, while you as the Imani have a constant beam attack for 3 seconds. Fighting Willow in this method forces her to do a few things. Change her focus to you, which alleviates pressure off your team, forces her to flutter out to reposition, which removes her move skill, or forces her healer to pocket her, which takes their focus off of the rest of the team. My main tip against Willow is to be mindful of her positioning at all times, and save your Frostfire Glide for when you need it. Being caught on the ground against Willow spam swings the duel in her favor. Vora in the past was a flank I paid little attention to as Imani, as her mobility was predictable and her damage came out quite slowly. However now, Vora deals a majority of her damage in a burst, meaning that she could kill you quicker. And, she's had the Relentless Presence talent added to base kit, meaning she now has 2 charges of Tendril without needing a talent. Because of this, I actually consider Vora one of the better flanks in the game, and now she poses a decent threat to Imani. The main takeaways is that the Frost Bomb isn't as effective against her since she has 2 charges of Tendril. Additionally, she can block the bomb altogether with Obliteration, a strategy she can pull off more often if she is running the new Eclipse Defection talent. Like other flanks, you want to use the same mentality when dueling Vora. Try to bait out abilities early with high damage fireballs, as in close range, Vora has the edge. Do also keep in mind that Vora can cripple you during Frostfire Glide to deny your retreat. Even if you escape though, due to Vora's 2 tendrils, she more than likely can keep up with you. Because of this, the general flanker strategy runs doubly true for Vora. I actually just realized as I was finishing this script that I completely forgot about Vatu last time. Let's remedy that. Against Vatu, pay attention to his movement patterns. Vatu players tend to either engage with ambush and then use dash to escape, or the inverse, where they will dash in and then ambush to another target to escape. Vatu has the best mobility in the game, with 3 charges of dash. Because of this, you don't want to be careless with your Frost Bomb. Try to save the ability for the brief downtime in between dashes. If you manage to catch him, you could either kill Vatu outright due to him being so frail, or you could force more mobility skills out of him, which overall lessens his threat towards your team. In general though, take the flank approach. Prioritize hitting him with high damage fireballs at range to force his skills out early. Because Vatu is extra erratic with his movement, I would advise that you don't use the Inferno Cannon against him. Oh, and if he's not running the HP card, Fire Burst combo. Against Kasumi, her Yokai Doll literally can't hurt you if you're out of range. Because of this, the general flanker strategy runs true once again. Use your fireballs at range to try and bait out her body and soul. You can actually root Kasumi during body and soul by targeting her body. While rooted, Kasumi can't move her soul, meaning that she won't get very far. It is important to note that Kasumi gains heavy damage reduction while body and soul is active. Because of this, I would save your Inferno Cannon for when the ability has ended. Do be careful to not step on a Spirit Trap, as the damage debuff applied via Curse Stacks can swing the fight in Kasumi's favor. If you are marked as the target for Bitter Betrayal, immediately use your Frostfire Glide and take to the skies. This ensures that the ultimate won't hit any of your other teammates. While the preferred strategy is to retreat until the disarm status is gone, unlike other damage dealers, you're not completely helpless when disarmed, as you can fight back against Kasumi with your Inferno Cannon. Against Nyx, the main threat you want to watch out for is the cripple via the Show of Force talent. Getting hit mid-glide can ruin your escapes. Typically though, you're playing out of Nyx's range, so her other 2 talents shouldn't concern you. If you do find yourself in a close range encounter, immediately take to the Frost Stance and make some distance by utilizing the Slow and Frost Bomb route. Preferably, you should be fleeing with the Frostfire Glide. When Nyx uses Abyssal Fortress, you can lob a Frost Bomb over it to get some damage in. If you have the angle, you can also finagle in damage with Pyromania Fireballs. When Nyx uses Royal Presence, all damage dealt to her is transferred to damage over time. While the ability is active, I find using Inferno Cannon to be worth it, as it keeps the pressure on, forcing Nyx's healers to work overtime, or forcing Nyx to reposition. Chaos Nexus can be used to pull you off of high ground. If this happens, use Frostfire Glide, or if you're daring, the Inferno Cannon, to avoid being stunned by the final slam, as once that happens, it's usually game over. Against Omen, I would not underestimate him. His Aphotic Reaver has the edge at close range, and packs a decent punch at far range too. Because of this, I would prioritize dueling him in Fire Stance at a distance, so he has to deal with damage falloff, while you won't. Additionally, while at range, Omen usually can't force you to give up your position, with the Deadly Domain cool. While you can root him during Darkstride, I find that to be very tricky, as the ability activates very quickly. Instead, I like to save the ability to tag him out of cover, or catch him off guard once his move skill has ended. Like Genos, you want to save your glide until after he has used Gravity Vice. Though the duration of the grab is only 1 second, sometimes that's all the time an Omen's team needs to take you out. Under normal circumstances, Omen's ult is not much to fear, but it is one of the best counters to your dragon, since it's slow and has a large hurt box. If the beam comes out, you can kiss your dragon goodbye. Against our newest support, Moji, AoE damage via Splitting Ice or Pyromania is going to be your best friend. Unlike other healers, Moji likes to play in the thick of it. You could play this to your advantage by constantly proccing damage on her via your AoE primaries. While both primaries have use against Moji, I actually like to prioritize the Frost Bolts if she's in mid-range. Due to her big hitbox, it's easier to guarantee higher DPS with the bolts, and the slow they provide will make Moji an easier target for your team. Unless she goes Jubilation, Moji isn't a super high threat to you damage-wise, but you should note that via Marks and Base Kit and via the Realm Runner talent, Moji has some of the best self-sustain in the support class. Because of this, if you don't get the kill on Moji, she will most likely heal herself back to full very quickly. Against the Magic Shield, you can pop her ally's bubble with just one fireball, even with Guardian capped. Moji's self-shield with the ability caps at 1000, but the ability will constantly give her 600 shields if she falls below that threshold while it's casting. Because of that, I would advise that you hold your attacks on Moji herself, as she will constantly stay ahead if you're the only one fighting her. The Inferno Cannon especially looks extra pathetic against this ability. While Magic Shield is being cast, I would change targets to a different enemy. Once the ability is ended, you could return focus to Moji and pop the self-shield with one fireball if she's not running Guardian. Scamper is an easy ability to fumble with your Frost Bomb, but it is important to remember that the ability only has a 4-second cooldown. So, if you don't kill Moji during that time, there's a high possibility that she will run off again. A very niche tip against this is that if you're running the Heatsink card at a 2 or higher, you can have a second Frost Bomb ready by using uncharged fireballs to reset the cooldown, in time for the next Scamper. The Frost Bomb is also doubly great at saving a teammate from Moji's Bon Appetit. And that's that. Seeing as Paladins is not getting any further updates, and that Imani or the environment around her won't be changed, this marks the finale of the complete Imani guide. I thank you all so much for watching. Imani is my favorite character in all of hero shooters. I hope I was able to share some of my passion and bestow some of my knowledge onto you. Let me know if this guide was helpful. As always, I'm Yellow Ninja, and keep soaring high, Warders.
Go die.
In your own
Don't jump
guide
off the map.
again!
My strength fades.